work. Does everybody have the screen share up?
Yeah.
Let's see if we can knock this out then. Welcome to Tribe Talk. It's the tribe is a group of like-minded people, and all of you are part of our tribe. We have much more in common than we do differences, so welcome. It's a pleasure to have you all here, and great to see some faces we haven't seen in a while. Tribe Talk is a dialogue, so if you have something to say, go ahead and say it. The whole purpose is for us to learn from each other and gain more and become better. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the end tonight, kind of a parting shot. What I do have to say, though, that this is an independent event. It's not sponsored by any organization, regardless of who participates. The one simple motive is for improvement, so that we can all learn a little, become better rider coaches, and then most importantly, help our students out. Okay, watch your ears. Let's see if it works. Didn't hear a thing, did you? All right. These are kind of the Tribe Talk guidelines for the evening. I won't read them to you, but there's a couple neat little gadgets with Zoom. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you should have a little icon that says Manage Participants. If you click on that, you should get a list of everybody in the room. And on the bottom of that list is some icons that you can use to say yes or no, or maybe raise your hand if you want to talk with somebody. Please do mute your microphone when you're not talking. And remember that if you're talking about a specific situation, please give some context, or maybe describe what your jurisdiction does so that people can understand a little bit better. Lurkers are welcome. If you do have technical difficulties, jump back in at your earliest convenience. Tonight, we have Lynne and Michael. Lynne will be talking the 5 core questions from MSF, and then Mike will be talking about range exercise number 1, and then we should have an opportunity at the end to throw some stuff Ray's way, or maybe have some good comments for us to think about as we leave. With that, I'm going to stop sharing and present Miss Lynne Vandewater, who is here to help us out. Can't hear you, Lynne.
You're still muted.
Well, do over. So as we talked about our little teaser on Wednesday, this segment's going to take a look at sharing ways that we can incorporate the messages of the BRC's 5 core questions into our facilitation of the course. These questions appear in RETSORG, in the MSF RETS standards document. They're kind of near the top of the screen in the RETSORG library. And as a little reminder of what those are, Don prepared a nice little video, and I'm going to try to make it play for you. So let me see if I can make that happen. You can see that those 5 core questions are pretty much encapsulated in the 5 summary questions that we use at the end of the basic writer course. So why do we want to reinforce these messages throughout the class? So on Don's website, he has a article about the retention of learning. And there were a couple of highlights in that article that I thought related pretty well to this topic. And here they are. The first, material fully learned is resistant to forgetting because meaningful learning builds patterns of relationships in the student's consciousness. Just as I came across this paragraph, I was having this thing that I keep coming across. My niece is engaged to a guy named Eric, and I can never remember if it's Eric with a K or Eric with a C. And it occurred to me that my dad's name is Kenneth, or was Kenneth. So I said, now I can connect Eric with a K with the K from my dad's name. And I read this little sentence and it was like, oh, just like Eric with a K. So if that helps that tie in for you. Information or action that is associated with something previously known or learned facilitates the later recall by the student. Unique or non-associated facts are usually forgotten unless they are of special interest to the student. So if there's some way that we can tag something that's important in a way that makes it memorable, maybe it'll stick. Each repetition gives the student an opportunity to gain a clearer and more accurate perception of the subject to be learned. But mere repetition does not guarantee retention. Practice gives an opportunity for learning, but does not cause it. Further, it is believed that 3 or 4 repetitions provide the maximum effect, after which the rate of learning and probability of retention falls off rapidly. So I guess there's such a thing as too much, okay? So with those things in mind, and I think I'm gonna stop the share so we can all see each other. I wanna open it up to you guys. I wanna hear how and where in the curriculum you find these places where you can emphasize these key points and make the experience a little bit more memorable. I am not hearing anything. Is that a technical error or is nobody talking?
That was my mic. Can you repeat that question again?
Sure. We're looking for ways in the curriculum. Where and how do you work these topics into your facilitation of the BRC? I'll reiterate the example I gave at our session on Wednesday. When I introduced the topic of the self-assessment chart and the, I just let brain fade here, the risk offset, the idea of the risk offset, right when we're introducing the self-assessment chart. I say, hey, does anyone remember in your e-course that section about maintaining a positive risk offset? Can someone tell me what that's about? And usually someone can. And I say, well, to do that, you need to be thinking about how you're doing as a writer. So we're going to start this habit right now of self-assessing how we're doing as a writer. We're going to start here in the classroom and we're going to do it out on the range. And hopefully that'll make it a habit for you, going forward into real life. So that's just a simple little tie-in. It took, even now, it took less than 30 seconds probably, but it makes that topic more relevant for the students and more inclined for them to use it. Anybody have any other areas that they use 5 core, and not even the questions, but the answers to the questions?
I feel like, Lynn, I feel like the 5 core questions are really the whole theme of the BRC. This is what we're doing, is these 5 core questions. If we're really gonna help people get some basic skills, and if we're gonna lower crashes, the 5 core questions that we're all looking at is the basis of, it's the whole theme. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I think that the e-course, as you mentioned, ties all 5 questions into what we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
Anybody had any extra emphasis? I mean, for example, when we do the construct a crash activity, all right, that's a chance to mention what makes crashes happen, right?
True, true.
And
Multiple factors. To reduce the factors, our wrap-up of that includes that we're going to be using a strategy. So there's a place where we can bring in those topics and just give a little bit of extra punch. You know, sometimes it's built into the summary, but again, sometimes that extra sentence, you know, I tell students in wrapping up those activities that, you know, it would be impossible for us to make an encyclopedia of when this happens, do this, when this happens, do that, because there's millions of things that could happen to you on the road and millions of combinations of things. But we can make a strategy that we can apply to anything that comes our way. And that kind of kicks off our whole lead into the discussion of strategies and why C is a good thing.
That's a really direction.
This is Colin from Woburn, Massachusetts. At least last year, we were using level 1 classroom. And in the managing risk chapter, there's a section with it's like a written scenario. A rider is riding home after work at 5 p.m., etc., and so on. And it's I get one of the students to read that, and what I get the students to do is when they hear a risk factor, just raise a hand. And then at the and then the reader stops, and then we continue, and there's hands going up all over the place, which is good. And then at the end of it, there's a question that says, what was the primary cause of this crash? Was it one single factor? And everybody usually gets it. It's a combination of factors. And one of the things that I like to do is to say, ask the question, can anybody control all of the factors? And the answer is no, not all of the factors, but those that, so I usually say, so which factors can you control? And it's, you know, my own risk offset, my own speed, my own not making assumptions, things like that. And I find that works well, that especially making it an interactive part where they're raising hands. Sometimes I get them to shout something like ding, you know, risk. And that makes it a bit more memorable for them, make it a fun activity, you know.
Well, there you go. That kind of ties into one of the points that, the 3 points that Don brought out in his article. Does anybody bring in the factors out on the range? We have factors on the range, don't we? I mean, the fact that the path of travel goes that way is a factor, right? The cones are factors. Does anyone find that in exercise 5, in particular on the bigger offset, sometimes students are smacking into the cones, and one of the leading causes of that is that they're not looking far enough ahead. So a question at the reflection might be, well, when do we want to see the factors? Do we want to see them, you know, when we're on top of them, or do we prefer to see them when we're farther out? So that can lead into our visual lead times, but getting our eyes up would be the key there so that we can see the factors in time to do something about them. Anybody else have anything they'd like to contribute?
I do know at the end of slide deck A, it kind of goes over the 5 summary takeaways, and it's really a nice slide because it'll put up the first question, and then, you know, you poll the students and see how well they get the answers or how you work on the answers. And most of the time, I mean, they're right spot on it.
Well, that's good. That's good. That means it's sunk in. There's a couple of activities that we do where we're directing students to make good choices or to think about the choices that they make. All right, which ones of those do you think call out to, you know, calling out that, hey, you're making choices here. It's about your decision making factors into your safety.
I was going to say, to kind of tie on to what Colin was talking about, in Mass, we are doing level 1 classroom. So for that risk section, that page 18, 19, a lot of times what I'll do is with the whiteboard, throw up 3 columns. One column is risks to riders. The other column's ways to manage risks. And then the third column is the rider and how the rider can affect risk in a positive way and in a negative way. And the 3 groups will go up. Group 1 will take care of the first column, and group 2 the second column, and group 3. And you'll be surprised they'll fill the whole board with all kind of risks and ways to manage it in ways that the rider is negatively or positively affecting risk. And it really is nice to capstone or to really hit everything in that section. And as we're working with the slide deck, it gets us right into where we're talking about the safety margin, where it's, you know, the rider, motorcycle, traction, and time and space. And then it really brings us right into risk offset, where they get to really work on that. So it kind of hits a lot on the 5 summary takeaways.
I like the fact that your sections about choice bring out that, you know, writers make good choices and maybe also could make bad choices, you know, because that kind of brings out that it's up to them to be a writer of good character and make a good choice.
Hi, Carol here. Appendix 10, where they do the values, the judgment, and choices. I've seen that done where it's a really good, you can use that as a review for them, as well as get good interaction out of the students on all of those, because you have the different choices. Why would you want to wear safety equipment? Why wouldn't you? And they get to decide what their decision is going to be. And you can also roll in the 5 core at that time as well.
Okay. Some places, these relationships are kind of built in, like when we're doing the CZ chart, that leads itself to a sentence or two about having a strategy would make it easier to do that activity, just like having a strategy is going to make those things easier to do on the street, knowing where to look, eliminating the crap that's not important, you know, being able to prioritize. Those are all part of our strategy. In the slide with the C slide with the ovals, breaking down the C strategy into components, it talks about in execute that key elements are well-timed and smooth. I kind of refer back to that slide on the range frequently, especially in the cornering exercises, to say, hey, remember in the classroom, we saw the C strategy, we got to the execute part, you know, the key things were, does anyone remember? And not always someone will remember, but well-timed and smooth. Well, this is what we mean by well-timed, that we're done braking before we start the turn. And smooth, you know, of course, kind of factors into that as well.
Something I heard recently from another coach, which I thought is a really, really good idea, and I might try to do it myself this year. When doing the section on riding gear, actually have some gear there and have like a full face helmet and a half helmet to compare, and get the students to compare, you know, a riding jacket and a t-shirt, regular jeans with riding pants, and riding boots with a pair of trainers, and come up with the pros and cons of each piece of either protective gear or not very protective gear. And I liked what that idea, and I may well use it if I can, because it makes the students themselves draw conclusions about, you know, yeah, wearing a t-shirt, it really is not going to give me the protection that a proper riding jacket will.
Mm-hmm.
And that, and as we saw in what you shared earlier, Lynn, you know, one of the factors is about, and one of the decisions we make every time we ride is, how well am I going to protect myself? And that's a very important decision every time we ride.
And that one happens before we even walk out the door.
Exactly, right, yes.
It might happen weeks before we walk out the door, you know, that we've got a plan. I think the slide, the activities, I lost my place here, the driving tendencies activity, the serious about safety activity, and safe riding versus risky riding are all good opportunities to call out that the choices that the riders make are important. Your life literally depends on these choices. So to reduce the risk, we just have to start to make a choice to reduce it, to get them to think about the actions that they're doing. And I think probably as car drivers, you know, we're on autopilot half the time because we've been driving for so long. It's good to call these things out and kind of slow down the thought process maybe a little bit and let students think about what's going behind their motivation in doing things. Something that I like to do with slide 133, that's the scenario slide with the pine cones. Does anybody find when you put that slide up that it gets a reaction from the students? I put that slide up and lots of times I hear a gasp goes up from the room, and the other slides don't produce that same result. And I let them answer what they're going to answer, but then I roll it backwards and deconstruct. I say, let me ask you a question. If you were riding down the road and there were a couple of pine cones on the street, would that make you freak out? And they say, no. Well, how about if there was an area where the pavement was that, would that put you into a panic? And they're like, no, not so much. I said, well, now how about there's a red car pulling out? Does that get your attention a little bit more? And they're like, oh yeah, that red car is of concern to me. I said, well, and how about if there's another car coming down the road right behind the red car? Does that make things a little bit more interesting to you? And they're like, oh yeah, then I'd really be paying attention. And now if we add into that, the pine cones and the wet pavement, it kind of brings out that it's that combination of factors that make that scenario produce that gasp, not each factor individually. I was hoping you guys would have a little bit more stuff.
Can anybody hear me? Am I all set? Good.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Lynn, I think that in answer to your question, I think that we're all doing this. I think that the curriculum, as Sarah said, lends itself to bringing in some of these core principles, okay? And I think that we don't as much consciously refer to them as maybe we will after tonight.
Well, maybe so, you know, and again, maybe it's just a matter of, you know, coming back a step and looking at it in more fine detail. I find that I try to use language that's used throughout the course. I try to use the right terminology. Sometimes I try to use the terminology that I know they're going to see again later on their test, just as a memory jogger to them. But I've got lots of little places. I mean, I can kind of, I guess, give a quick run through. If no one has anything else to contribute, I'll just kind of give you some of the things that I've got, if it would help you out. Driving tendencies, A4, we think about our current behavior and we choose to modify, so choice comes in. In the improving perception cube, we're talking about strategy, right? And seeing factors early. The CZ, we talk to strategy and we relate that to street riding, which of course is useful. The visual acuity chart, to see the factors, we need to have good visual acuity. And the first set of search and evaluate slides with the questions, we've got the factors and how they combine, but we're prioritizing to see the trap. Peripheral awareness, if we want to see the details of the factors, we're going to have to move our eyes. So there's a lot of emphasis, especially early on, and on the range early on, the emphasis is on the small stuff and not so much the bigger, combining the things. I already talked about some of these things, so I'm just skipping ahead here. Out on the range, in general, it seems like in the earlier exercises, they serve well to highlight the factors and vision while we're learning those basic skills. But level 2 has more opportunities to discuss strategies and choice and risk offset. Has anybody used the fact that it's the combination of factors that led to a student being canceled out? You know, when we were just going in a straight line and stopping, you were kind of doing okay, but then when we added in shifting, there's another factor, and then we add in turns, there's another factor, and you know, maybe that proved overwhelming to a particular student. So it's something that you can pull out because now they already know about it, and you can use that as a tool to help explain to them. All of the exercises that involve cornering, you can reference your strategy and breaking down the search, evaluate, and execute, especially those exercises where we're standing on the sidelines and we've got an audience that's there and can listen while they're watching the exercise. Those are some things we can bring out to help reinforce that. And the circuit exercises and the reflections, why do the riders mess up? Often the answer is that they weren't managing their risk offset. Well, which parts weren't they managing? So you can actually bring these things in, and it's not forced or unnatural. It's just part of the dialogue that you're having. And I think it does help a lot with retention. When we first started with, going back a ways now with this new curriculum, our first classes were a little rough because we, were kind of feeling out where to put the emphasis. How much would they remember from the e-course? How much would they not remember? And we've changed some things up front, emphasizing that they really need to not just blow through the e-course, but pay attention to it. So that helped, but also adding in these little pieces of emphasis was helpful as well. So, and this is just the 5 core questions, kind of going off in another direction to consider. There's tons of places where we can make connections between the e-course, the classroom components, the range components, and real life, and draw these little lines and connect the dots, as we're conducting those to help with retention and to make it more interesting and provide motivation. What are your questions?
I have a question, Lynn, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There's 5 questions. They're kind of from previous talks we've had recently, they're kind of separated. 3 of them are perceptual and 2 of them involve executive functions. Which are which? Does anybody know?
Well, the last 3 executive functions.
What's different?
Where thought process is happening.
I heard somebody start to say something. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, that was me, Don, sorry. Certainly the making safety a priority, I think that's the 4th core question answer or summary. That's absolutely an executive function.
Okay. And so what other one would be executive function? I know this is a bit deep, but I heard it recently, so I'm wondering if anybody else heard it. I see a hand going up, Jeff in Moorhead. 5, everybody's saying 5, I get that. So 4 and 5 are attributed to the executive functions, and the first 3 are perceptual in nature. All right, check on learning complete, like that. All right, good enough. So everybody, please give a round of applause for Lynn for sharing the 5 core questions tonight. It looks so cool when you guys clap. I really dig that. And with that, we'll kind of segue over to Mike. Are you ready?
I am.
So you have the console.
All right, let's see if I can share my screen properly. I'm going to apologize in advance. I don't have a fancy video to show everybody. But my screen should be shared right now.
You're good?
So as mentioned earlier tonight, I'm going to be talking about improving rider outcomes with a concentration on exercise 1, which is motorcycle familiarization. A lot of students and ride coaches tend to take exercise 1 as, a real simple exercise. There's not a lot going on. I'm a firm believer that if you really start, if you perform exercise 1 well,
Oh, there you go.
there's a lot of things that can happen later in the course as a direct result of exercise 1 being performed properly. So first I want to say thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Don, for inviting me to Tribe Talks. And I'm really getting a lot out of these weekly conversations, as well as the happy hours, kind of neat and open, and the discussions that take place there are fantastic. Again, I know Don had a reminder at the beginning, like this is a dialogue between like-minded individuals within this group. Your participation is why we're doing this. I mean, everyone has some great ideas. It'd be great to share amongst our peers so that we can grow the tribe. I'm not speaking on behalf of any organization. A lot of the thoughts are my own, based on some experiences with maybe teaching a few classes here and there. So let's get started. I know most of the rider coaches on this forum, on Tribe Talks, seek knowledge in many different ways. I review the Rider Coach Guide periodically, and I'm always amazed at some of the things that I pick up along the way. What's important today, I kind of hone in on, and then later on I'll pick it up and read it again and find some other things that really strike home. So one of my favorite quotes in the Rider Coach Guide really has to do with students. And it says learning occurs in many ways, but in most cases your brain is always on. People are always want to learn. And how do we learn? We learn from experience. And if we do our job right as rider coaches, we can accelerate the process by following a well-structured approach. And the BRC gives us guidelines. Now, the range cards are well written, the Rider Coach Guide is well written. And so if we do our jobs, the students can learn properly and quickly. So the moral of this story is frequently reread your Rider Coach Guide. It's a wealth of information, and it's always finding new stuff. As rider coaches, we're always instructing our students that self-assessment is important. But it's also important for us as rider coaches as well. So I ask us right now as a group, let's reflect on the question that's posed. So take a moment and think about a common rider error that you may or may not, that you have seen many times or maybe once or twice in your delivery of a BRC, specifically on the range. So just take a moment and think of some errors that you might see a rider make while either doing level 1 or level 2 range exercises. You don't have to stop with one. I'm sure if you've taught more than 1 or 2 classes, you might have seen several errors. Some might stand out as being a common error. So everyone have some thoughts there. We're not going to share your thoughts, but just think about the root cause of the error that you witnessed or that you remembered. Could have the cause been, or was that covered in exercise 1? So especially with gross motor skill errors, we talk a lot about, or the riders have an opportunity to perform a lot of physical activity that goes around gross motor skill development and motorcycle control. But stated another way, could those errors have been avoided if we had better observational skills and coaching during exercise 1? So think about the errors that you thought of. Could those errors been avoided if we spent a little more time with the student and correcting errors in exercise 1? So another common terms that we use, agree or disagree. Exercise 1 provides students with all the gross motor skills needed to ride a motorcycle. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? So if you agree, just put your hand up or wave or give me a thumbs up. Anybody?
Did it once already, yeah, right there.
It doesn't include shifting.
It didn't happen.
I hear somebody talking. Is that a question?
Well, exercise 1 isn't designed to teach the students how to shift.
But it does cover all the motions and the procedures for shifting.
Agreed, but shifting the bike while riding isn't happening
Okay.
in exercise 1.
Excellent. But all the gross motor skills, most of them covered in exercise 1.
For the most part, yes. But
Most
of course,
part, yes.
we still have to be constant in evaluating them constantly as they're progressing.
Absolutely. So,
Yeah, I think the key is in the word provides. It may not provide the students with all the gross motor skills needed to ride a motorcycle during that exercise, but it probably does make them aware. It covers the gross motor skills.
Dare we even say it familiarizes them?
Yeah, I think that would be a good word to use.
yeah, absolutely.
Or
Absolutely.
introduces?
Yeah, introduces would be a better word.
Right. So all the gross motor skills are introduced. And as we know through the Rider Coach Guide, we have to learn about procedures and hold apart. So they may have an idea of what or how to do things. And as you may have noticed, exercise 1 does give the students an opportunity to make those big gross muscle memory connections. But what's actually missing? As you guys might have noticed, what's actually missing?
Riding the motorcycle.
Actual riding, right? So these are all done static. They're all like, there's no feedback from the act of riding, but the gross skills.
Balancing.
What was that, Jeff?
Well,
Balancing. There's no balancing in exercise 1.
Right. So all the little nuances that you get from feedback from the motorcycle are almost completely gone. So can you guys think of anything that we do as rider coaches prior to exercises that are static, that develop gross muscle memory?
Or simulated practice.
exactly.
Simulated practices, right. And so exercise 1 has simulated practices embedded all the way throughout
Right.
the exercise. And us as rider coaches, if we observe good behavior or bad posture, we can make those corrections early on. Now, they're not going to get a lot of the minor feedback that you'd expect from riding the motorcycle to make those corrections inherently, but we're there for that. We have to provide those nudges. Someone who's been riding a motorcycle for a really long time knows exactly what the controls are, but what do you commonly see? What kind of errors do those riders typically make in regards to posture?
The one that I see quite a lot in exercise 1 and spend a lot of time correcting is having a knuckles up, flat wrist on the
Sure.
throttle.
Absolutely.
Quite an important one.
And then experienced riders tend to show up and they various combinations of fingers on levers. I'd like to say 2 are most common on the brake lever, but I've seen a whole host of combinations. But correcting those early really sets the tone for the whole class. The other thing that's missing is context. We ask them to perform basic activities like turning the handlebars full lock to full lock. They have no idea where that's going to be needed later in the class, but the act of doing it does give them some ability to say, hey, I can turn the handlebars full lock. Same thing with turning their head. If you integrate making that full lock turn left or right, but have them turn their heads in those directions and start that process early on in exercise 1 so that they can say, hey, I'm turning my handlebars. I should really be looking in that direction generally anyway. So context is another thing that's really missing. They mainly struggle with shifting gears. The motorcycle's not running. So although we go over the process of shifting gears, it's fairly, can be difficult for some students, but it doesn't put it in context because there's no motion. So although they learn a lot of the gross motor skills in exercise 1, there's some things that are missing that you guys easily pointed out. The general flow of exercise 1, as a rider coach, especially on the range. I mean, how are we supposed to be communicating with the class? What works best for us?
Drill sergeant approach.
Drill sergeant approach.
We should really give them the opportunity to help to discover the controls as you're reading them off, and also make sure that they really understand what they're really starting to do is find those controls and manipulate them, and give them time, extra time to do it a few times, not just once and done.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say it's all about discovery. So the students really bonding with the bike. It's a discovery process. So as we go over something, if they don't look fluid, you know, give them extra repetitions or a couple repetitions. But really, there's verbal and nonverbal. If I see somebody's wrist position kind of off, you can just do this, and it helps them. You know.
Yeah, that's right. So I like your choice of words as exploratory. So at the beginning of exercise 1, it really is an exploratory thing. For the novice rider who's never been on a motorcycle, the beginning of this exercise really does the basics. And so they're going to naturally look for the controls. It's a really natural process. And us as rider coaches, at the beginning of the exercise, we're providing a lot of verbal instructions because they have no idea of what they're looking at or what to find or how to find things. But as the exercise progresses, as we go further and deeper into the exercise, we need to set some goals for our students that towards the end of the exercise, they should know where the controls are and be comfortable with those controls so that they're not looking for them when they use them. And if we do our part well, all these little things that we do up front can serve us better later in the day or later on day 2. And as we progress the general flow of the exercise, at the end of the exercise 1, by all means, we should be communicating by mainly nonverbal instruction and nonverbal corrections to posture, let's say, like that, you know, the light tap on the wrist, you know, your wrist is down, or all 4 fingers. Doesn't mean 4th gear, but it may mean put all 4 fingers on those controls with that wrist flat. And however you decide to communicate that. But at the end of the exercise, the students should feel comfortable enough with the controls, and you should feel comfortable enough with your students where they're getting mainly hand signals. And that may serve a better purpose later on. So we're looking for better student outcomes, but we have to do our job up front. Key points, as you guys are well aware, for exercise 1, I'm a stickler for posture, riding posture. It all starts there. So head and eyes up, you know, back straight, elbows bent, look relaxed on the motorcycle. For novice riders, you may have to coach them on how to grip the hand grip. I've seen some I've seen some poor posture, and I've seen some people actually grab just rest their hand on the throttle. The whole wrist is there, and they're not squeezing things or reacting properly. But exercise 1 has a lot of simulated practice embedded in it, whether it's full lock turns, squaring the bars is mentioned several times. And as long as we do our job right, they'll understand why that's needed. Simulated practice is for a lot of other primary controls is there as well. Throttle use, front brake, combination of front brake and throttle use using the friction zone. And so we want to be consistent in using proper terms so that when the rider coach 2 shows up, everyone's on the same page. But a lot of this stuff is done up front.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
One thing I like to encourage the students to take on board in this exercise is the idea that all of those primary controls are operated by feel, and looking at them doesn't really provide much in the way of useful feedback. And the riders are going to need to keep their head and eyes up, as you point out, with the posture.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. That's a great point. As someone brought up a little earlier at the bottom of this slide, what does repeat as needed mean? How many times do you repeat something? Lynne talked about an article she read from Don's website about repetition. So 3 to 5 times is about the right amount of time for proper learning to take place. Some students need more. Some students get it right out of the box. But it's our job to make sure the whole group is performing in such a way that we set them up for success.
So
That's
read,
what I was going to say. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll let you go, Sarah.
no, go ahead. I just said, so read your class, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, read your students.
So most times I'm pretty fortunate here in the state of Connecticut. Most of the classes that we run, we have 2 rider coaches. Rider coach positions for exercise 1. What are you guys doing? What do the range cards say, and what does the notes and narratives say about rider coach positions? Anybody have any idea?
I can tell you what we usually do. If there are 2 coaches, one is usually taking the first half of the students, and the second one coach is in the last half of the students, making sure that they are hearing everything and manipulating. That way, one coach isn't responsible for all 12.
Sure.
We're kind of splitting them up into a group already without them even realizing it.
Sure.
We do similar, but even within that, I personally am always wandering amongst my students. I don't stand in one spot. I'm
Yeah.
giving individual attention to each student as they need it and trying to ascertain how each student is doing by standing right next to them at some point during the exercise.
Absolutely, especially the ones who are struggling with, whether it's a shifting thing where most people tend to struggle finding neutral, or posture issues that possibly want show up later on in exercise 1, where people kind of revert back to their old habits.
Matt, are you moving around if you're reading the cards?
So it's Mike, but I appreciate it.
No, Matt. He made the statement about he's moving around.
Okay.
If I feel the students can hear me, my voice carries really well. If they're responding well and they can still, and it still seems that they can hear me while I'm moving around, then yes, I continue to do that. If not, then I'll move back to the front, read the next point, walk down the students again, come back to the front, read the next point, and so on.
Yeah, the way I usually do it is if I'm reading the cards, which is the old C1, I'll stay mostly up in front, and I would prefer the additional coach to move around and address any individual needs, but that's just technique.
Yeah, so Peter, we use something similar here in Connecticut. We have usually 2 lines of 6 bikes, front line and the back line. They're staggered just in case, and there's plenty of space between them. Rider coach 1 provides a lot of verbal instructions early on, reading the cards, which is usually done best in front of the group. Again, you don't stay there. You could move around to see different sides of the motorcycle, or if you see someone struggling, by all means help. But Rider Coach 2 definitely roams around the group and provides that individual instruction as needed. And so that's typically what works best for us here. And what I found is Rider Coach positions are not stated in the cards or in the notes and narratives at all. So it gives us, the structured flexibility to do what works for us. Now, if we're working 8-to-1, it's a tough class for us. That's a lot of observations to be made for an 8-to-1 class with no help. So for those people working 8-to-1s, my hat goes off to you. It doesn't seem like 2 additional students would make a big deal, but it really, geographically, it spreads everyone out, makes our job a little more difficult.
When you're teaching alone, sometimes those repetitions serve not just to help the students, but to help you to be able to see everything, to best evaluate everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. What not to do? Yeah.
Can I just chime in real quick here?
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt. Mike. But I found like when you're in the front, you got to kind of move to the side. Like if you're talking about the clutch and the zone, so that when you have an angle that you can kind of look down and see all that. When you're on the brake side, shifting more towards the left side so that you can watch the front brake application, the rear brake. So you're kind of moving around while you're in the front to give you better observation of the sides of the motorcycles.
Sure, absolutely.
You can see 6 to 8 people at a time.
Sure.
Where you can get that angle where you can view down.
No, I agree. You definitely have to be moving around. You just can't stay in one place for exercise 1. You miss a lot of the nuances of what the riders are actually doing. And if you correct it up front, my thought process is if you can do this well in exercise 1, it improves student rider outcomes, and it also makes your job a lot easier later in the day or on day 2. Because a lot of this stuff is simple reinforcement. So You bring it up, make sure it's done properly and consistently, provide the hand signals so that they know what to look for and how to respond to those hand signals correctly. By the end of the exercise, they should be comfortable. So, but it definitely takes 2 rider coaches to make this exercise a success. If the second rider coach doesn't have the same thought process as you, they might wander off, they might wander back, they might kind of hover around and just kind of kick the pavement, or maybe do range maintenance or set up exercises if you're not blessed with a range aid. So by the end of exercise 1, the riders must become comfortable with the following items on the left-hand side of the screen, right? They should be able to mount properly with very little direction, right? You just ask them to mount and make sure they're doing it properly. Assume proper riding posture once on the motorcycle. And that can be done by hand signals or nonverbal corrections. Again, if you can get them to start the motorcycle by using Find C, have them give you back that ready to ride as a group. So now they know how to act on the motorcycle. Use those hand signals for speeding up and slowing down in exercise 1, and have them roll on and roll off the throttle nice and smoothly. So you're coordinating, it's like a mini concert. You're the director. You just give them the, let's go faster, let's go slower, and you make your movements nice and smooth, and you watch their result. Make sure they're nice and smooth on that throttle. Again, you give them that hand signal for turning off the motorcycle. You make sure they're following the proper procedures. But at the end of exercise 1, all riders should be familiar with how we're communicating with them for future exercises. At the end of exercise 1, we also need to make sure that the students actually understand the importance of the following, right? Squaring the bars for stopping, that combination of clutch, throttle, and front brake use for stopping. The Rider Coach Guide does a great job, and even the range cards say that 1, the students are repositioning for exercise 2, give them the hand signal to stop, and that's the first time they're actually getting feedback from squeezing that front brake lever. And a lot of students are really surprised at how sensitive that front brake lever is. They've manipulated that control a few times when the motorcycle was not moving. And now we're pushing the bikes, or they're pushing the bikes, and they actually get some feedback for the first time. And some riders are really surprised at how sensitive that front brake lever can be. We also need to make sure that they really understand how to regain control, whether it's perceived control or actual control is irrelevant. If they feel like they're out of control or they are actually out of control, the process is the same, right? Squeeze in the clutch, use both brakes to come to a stop. So again, if you conduct this exercise properly, definitely puts your students at ease. It gives the students a better understanding of what the future coaching on the range may look like by nonverbal communication. So again, if you start this process early enough, there should be no surprises that we're communicating nonverbally. Builds a great foundation for the remainder of class. And if done properly, you can improve rider outcomes. So thank you guys very much. I'm not sure how we are for time, but does anybody else have any suggestions for assisting rider coaches in executing a better exercise 1?
Hi, Mike. I would just say what we tend to do is I encourage our coaches and myself as well to have the students do it until they're bored. You know, it's like everyone's like, oh, I know you've got it. Some of them are really good already. They already know how to ride. Be like, we need to make sure everyone's got this, because if everyone's got this, everyone will be much safer, and then we can ride and we can go from each exercise and we can have a great time. But we can't do that until everyone feels super comfortable. So it might take people a little bit extra, but just be patient, because this is where the foundation, the base comes. And once everyone gets this, then we can really start having some fun. But until we get there, you know, we need to take care of that first. So just explaining to people, and usually people are pretty understanding, especially because they're pretty excited and, you know, and happy to be here. So
Right. So you're absolutely correct. You know, the riders that show up with some experience on a motorcycle, they tend to take this, they just shrug it off. They go through the motions. We have to really realize that we have a good mix of experiences as students.
Hey, Mike.
Some riders have never been on the bike before. Yes, Josh.
Something I was going to add to that, when I do have experienced students, something I might use as a precursor, I'm saying, okay, I know you've been riding or you've already been doing things. Use this exercise as an opportunity to really say, okay, how smooth am I really operating my throttle? How smooth am I really operating my clutch? So it's kind of like breaking your riding down and building it back up.
Absolutely.
So especially where you have a mixed class, you know, I say, okay, we have some novices, some people with experience. So yeah, if you have experience, use this as that opportunity. And it really, it sets, I think, a good tone, and it seems to work out.
Sure, absolutely. That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, a lot of times if I sense that you got that experienced rider, I'll enlist them to help me help the inexperienced rider.
Sure.
I'd say, hey, you know, let's make sure that, you know, because these inexperienced guys are looking at you, because they already know, because we've been in the classroom a little bit, that they're looking at you. So let's show them the proper technique. Help me help them.
Sure.
I think based on my observations of the students in exercise 1, it can sometimes structure how I get the students lined up for exercise 2. You know, I generally want my weaker riders in the center of my group, my stronger riders the outside. So I sometimes change my method of disbursement, you know, to get to the exercise 2 start cones.
Right. Yeah, especially if you're in like an 8-to-1, you want your weaker riders close together so that you can coach them equally. If you position your weaker riders at the outskirts of the range, you're going to spend a lot of time walking back and forth, possibly, depending on how quickly those weaker students learn. Great. Well, thank you guys for sharing. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, Don.
Oh,
Well, can I ask one more
Mike.
question?
Oh, we got one more question.
Yeah, I'm listening to everyone talking about how you get a student out there on the range and how we're doing a little extra teaching to those. But how do you prepare your students, especially those students who have never touched a bike? They want to learn how to ride a motorcycle, but don't understand the mechanics yet, even though they've gone through the e-course and everything. How are you dealing with these particular students? And maybe I'm guilty of this. I'm pretty much a nice guy. I will spend extra time, actually bring them in a couple days before the class actually starts and try to get them familiar so they don't feel uncomfortable. I think everybody has experienced a student that just feels very, very uncomfortable. So does everyone just not worry about that, or do other instructors take the time to get somebody really familiar with the motorcycle before we put you on the range?
So if they're that nervous, they should really take an IME course, which would cover a lot of this stuff in advance at a much slower pace.
Mm-hmm.
They're not offered everywhere. They're often canceled because they don't have enough students. I teach at several different locations, and so most of the classes I teach are for the state. For the last 4 or 5 years, I've been doing the Rider Academy for Harley-Davidson. They have something called the Jump Start, and they make sure every student of a BRC spends some time on a Jump Start. And so if you guys don't know what a Jump Start is, basically it's a motorcycle on a treadmill, and the dealership gets every rider, every prospective rider or a student onto the Jump Start prior to class. And so they're shifting the bike and starting the bike up before we even see them for the BRC. And I found that some of those students who would have a high challenge student who's really nervous, that previous experience, like you mentioned, puts them at ease for joining a BRC class. Again, for the state, we get what we get and we don't get upset, right? We got a whole broad range of students. Some have no experience, some show up with high anxiety, and we have to deal with every one of those people individually. Sometimes after an exercise, if you have to provide some additional training, go right ahead. But follow the curriculum, it works. I mean, that's why we're all here, right? We're all believers at the curriculum.
Well, that's kind of, and I appreciate that. That was a good answer for me, because, and I didn't mean to lead you into that. I'm a riding academy
coach at Rock City Harley Davidson. We do have a jump start, but listening to everyone talk, I know that not everyone has that opportunity to have that. So I was just curious as to maybe how many of the other coaches that are out there who may not have a static bike or anything, how they were handling that. So that's pretty much what I was thinking. And thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the
I
question.
I can share with you quite a few of the sites that I work at. We don't have that luxury of the jump start. I'm Rider Academy instructor as well in Iowa, but I just reassure the students that, hey, this program is designed to take somebody who's never been on a motorcycle and give them the basics. So if you follow along and let me know if you have anything you want to recover, we're going to do that for you, because we're here to help you learn to achieve your goal of learning how to ride a motorcycle.
And I think learning to read their body language. I mean, you know, right off the bat, you know, this person is intimidated. So honestly, how you approach them as a coach makes a difference. And if you come in with an attitude that, well, if you don't get it, you're out of here, versus like, hey, we're at the bottom, we'll all start at the bottom. And then I also liked what somebody said earlier, we're always on display. And so those people that come in with a lot of experience, at least that's what I've done, they tend to get a little cocky. You'll start to see your students ride that way, and they are nowhere near that level, and you've got to pull them back and say like, okay, you got to tone it down, because you're going to cause some issues, because they think they can do what you're doing, and you're not supposed to be doing that anyway.
Yeah, just I want to chime in. Posture. I found when you get students that never sat on a bike before, just when they sit on the bike, you got to let them kind of sink into that seat and get a feel for it. Then start turning the handlebars left, right, lean back a little bit. And the more calm that you can get them, the more relaxed they'll be. Then their posture just kind of comes into play. And then as you progress with the throttle use, the wrist down, and Mike was talking about that smooth up, that's something, and even the front brake application. When you have them push a bike and then they squeeze the brake, initially they'll grab it and you'll see the forks dip down. Getting that up front is something that you can relate to them back when you get to exercise 2. Remember how we ramped, there was a nice smooth ramping up at the throttle. Well, that's the kind of gas you're going to be giving it as you're going across the range in the riding part when you have to coach. The front brake application. But posture, when it comes to them getting relaxed, you can see it in exercise 2. I digress for a second. On the rocking step, you let them go. You can see people that might be tense. The more they do it, you'll all of a sudden just see them arms sink. So it's getting them relaxed with the motorcycle, and that's posture, for my opinion.
I try to do an
I'd like
analogy.
to take a moment here and, you know, kind of get off of this topic. We could probably spend all night, and what we'd like to do, I'd like to note that, you know, like the handbook says, this is for the normal rider, and I think the normal basic learning rider. And if we follow the script and, you know, take our time and show care and attend to the students, most will do well, and those who don't will spend a little extra time, and then I think we'll get it out a lot and be able to move along past exercise 1. Mike, I'd like to thank you for presenting tonight. Awesome. You made me write notes, so it must have been good.
Those errors that you're going to correct me for later?
No, errors to correct myself. You know, we're all learning. I don't correct anybody. I'm the learner here, listening to all you. And with that, I'd like to move along, because we did get behind just a little bit, and throw it out. Any questions that or comments that Ray would like to make first, and then your questions for Ray after that. So Ray, any comments?
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. No, outstandingly good stuff. It's just great to see all this. Just want to have one question open up for any brief comments. Where are rider coach candidates during their student teaching with this? You're going into some very sophisticated analysis, extremely tight, putting connections together. Does that happen in the student teaching of rider coach candidates, and what can we do to make that happen if it is not? Any comments?
I was going to say, I definitely try to make it happen when I have rider coach candidates.
One of the things I've been doing locally here is before we got on lockdown was we actually were meeting once a week down at the range, and I was helping them, hey, read the cards. I'm a student. Teach me. And that, I think, helps them a lot when they get to that point where they are actually starting to do that in preparation to going to their rider coach prep.
Jason, do you have your hand up, or was that from before?
No, that's me all the time, but I was trying to, be respectful of said rules. So we'll go with now. As far as the rider coach candidates go, I think the biggest thing is the mentoring process and getting them some shadow time so we can talk about what's going on and when, because seeing it under fire for the first time is not necessarily where we could best develop those skills. So having those coach candidates in the mentorship process, and hopefully have one. We're lucky enough in Wisconsin, we got a pretty good mentoring program that Sarah heads up. And that pays dividends of just having a little bit of range time with a experienced coach to see what's going on before they get there.
Gary, did you have your hand up? Anything else for Rick?
Any questions?
I was going to say, I was trying to put my hand up, but I kind of screwed my screens up. I sat on the cord while we were talking, and I lost my screen for a minute. But one thing I do is I'll invite experienced rider coaches to the rider coach prep to ride mistakes or to be students, to be novice students. That way they can do some of the things that we see all the time, so the students get a chance to see that in their peer teaching.
I think there's a lot of evidence out there from listening to the replies here about candidates, and certainly in research that I've been exposed to, that any time that we can take with potential candidates before they actually go through a prep is worthwhile. So we'll kind of end that there. Any other comments, Ray?
No. No, I'm good.
Thank you very much, by the way, again.
One of the comments on Facebook, Mark Wing said, it's a success for the candidates if they can navigate the structure of such a busy exercise. If there is good front loading, then we can get deeper into how rather than just what.
Great comment.
Any cleanups I need to do from VRETs? Anybody happen to watch those?
Just keep
Well, I'm finding it's very hard to get in because you fill up so quick.
Well, we might expand the number, but I haven't heard anything about that yet.
I was at the VRETs yesterday and I really enjoyed it. And I commented, I really hope you guys can make older ones available for review. I work during the week and I'm not available to attend those. So it'd be nice to be able to watch them after the fact.
Thanks, Matt. Did you hear that, Ray?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Barely.
All right, I'm going to quick throw up a poll for tonight. If you would take a moment to go down through there and give us some answers.
Only 3 questions tonight?
I was kind of typing them as we were going through stuff and things that were just coming up in my mind. Sorry. And I figured maybe it would be easier to show you the results with just 3 questions. %in. 100% voted. Polling has ended. And I'll go ahead and share the results. Can everybody see those? Probably not. Let me do that.
No. Oh, there they are.
So I'll leave that up there for a couple more seconds. I do the screen print. And results coming down. I want to take a second and give a round of applause for Lynn and Michael once again for their topics tonight. Really appreciate it. Lots of hands and claps. Dig it. Next week, we will be hearing from Sarah Kretschmeyer, and I really like her title, Getting Bigger with a Smaller Presence. So I'm looking forward to that. And then I'm still working with Michael Davis, so it may be a little bit of a surprise of what he will be bringing up. This is my parting thought tonight. Just take a second to read that, and I'll read it as well. Learning and growth come piece by piece, and each piece must be worked for the patient effort of study and observation of everything, including themselves. And that's by a man named Scott Peck, a book I just finished that really has me thinking about how to better myself. And so with that, I wanted to talk a little bit more, go back to last week's topics of reflection. And when you reflect, I hope that you have an infinite mindset. And what that means is that your mind is enabled enough to go out and say, I can find a better way. I can improve. There is something more out there that I haven't achieved yet that I can get to. And this comes a lot from an educational background of a man named Sanford, where he realized that everybody needs to be challenged a little bit. And I hope that there's somebody in your life that challenges you to be better. But I also hope that that person who challenged you is also there to support you in trying to be better and be improved. And with that, I ask in parting, do you have a mentor? Are you a mentor to somebody else? Because if you aren't, maybe you should be. And if you haven't found somebody that helps you, challenges you, and supports you along the way, certainly reach out to somebody that you think could do that or that you could benefit from them. And chances are they'll probably be there to help you. And so those are my parting thoughts about this week. I want to thank you again for showing up to Tribe Talk. And we'll get this video turned around and posted so you can share with your friends. Please bring more people in. Let's open up this dialogue to more people and share and improve together. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Don.
Say good night, Don. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Don, really great. Thanks, Lynn.
Welcome.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought it was great.